Hello, I wanted to give a reading update and speak a little bit more of what I talked about in my recent story, which was how my reading of Brothers Karamazov has sent me down a rabbit hole and made me spend some time with the King James Bible, in particular the book of Job and the Gospel of Lucas. And the book of Job also led me down the rabbit hole of Carl Jung's The Answer to Job's Questions. And I'll try to talk a bit about this and why I think it is relevant to the Brothers Karamazov. So, the book of Job, in essence, is part of the Old Testament, and the story, in summary, you can say, is that for whatever reason, Satan comes to God in heaven, and God asks him how things are going on earth. And the reason for that is that Satan in the Old Testament is not the same as in the New. It's not Lucifer, it's not the fallen angel, it is Hasadan, which is more of a jester that is part of the heavenly court. Be that as it may, God brags to Satan about his faithful servant Job and how God fearing and just he and righteous he is. And Satan answers God that it's all well and good and easy to be God fearing and righteous when you have everything that you need, when you are very fortunate. Indeed, Job is very fortunate. He has a lot of riches, he has a lot of land, and he has sons and daughters, and everything is going great. So God and Satan more or less starts a bet where God tells Satan that you can do with Job whatever you want, just don't kill him, kind of thing. And Satan then causes the destruction of the crops of Job's lands, and the death of all his animals, and the death of his sons and daughters. And still, Job praises God and loves God and is righteous. So Satan comes again to God in heaven, and God again brags and says, see what I said? Job is God-fearing and righteous, and nothing that you did changed his mind. But Satan again taunts God and says, well, Job is still in good health and he still has his life, and something along those lines. And God then gives him a second chance to prove him wrong, to torment Job even further. And he causes then Job to be infected with some sort of pestilence. He's covered in boils from head to toe, and he's very near death, and he's in agony, and all his family is dead, and his whole life is destroyed for no apparent reason. And as the book of Job then continues, we have Job lying on his sickbed, on his deathbed, and finally, you can say, cursing God and complaining about the unjustness of the situation that he is in. And he is visited upon from three friends that are, so to speak, there to comfort him, although they do nothing of the sort. They actually quite annoy him, to the extent that at some point he is kind of telling them that he wishes that they would just fuck off and let him die in peace. Paraphrasing a little bit here, but that's the gist of it. And then, finally some resolution happens when the Lord then speaks unto Job. And we'll get to that. But reading the book of Job, I found that it was almost it was very difficult actually to read. The language was very convoluted, and I'll give you some examples of that. But that was what led me into rereading Carl Jung's The Book of Job, which I read last year. And this is also, despite its short length, quite an impenetrable work. But I got a lot more out of it this time. But just to give you some examples, so chapter 18 of the Book of Job we have Job lying on his deathbed, and his three friends are trying to convince him that he must have done something wrong, even though we know that he hasn't. But he must have done something wrong in order to deserve this curse from God. And so chapter 18 opens. Then answered Bildad the Shuhite and said, How long will it be ere you make an end of words? Mark, and afterwards we will speak. Wherefore are we counted as beasts and reputed vile in your sight? He teareth himself in his anger. Shall the earth be forsaken for thee? And shall the rock be removed out of his place? Yea, the light of the wicked shall be put out, and the spark of his fire shall not shine. The light shall be dark in his tabernacle, and his candle shall be put out with him. The steps of his strength shall be straitened, and his own counsel shall cast him down. It goes on and on like this for a bit, but this is essentially, again, the friends of Job trying to convince him that he must have been done something wrong, and therefore he's been punished. But you can get a sense of what the language is. So we then move to chapter 19, and most of the book goes like this. It's dialogue between Job's friends and Job himself. And chapter 19 then goes, Then Job answered and said, How long will ye vex my soul and break me in pieces with words? These 10 times have ye reproached me. Ye are not ashamed that ye make yourself strange to me? And be it indeed that I have erred, mine error remains with myself. If indeed ye will magnify yourself against me, and plead against me my reproach, know now that God hath overthrown me, and hath compassed me with his net. Behold, I cry out of wrong, but I am not heard. I cry out, but there is no judgment. So here he's complaining about his friends, which I think is fairly reasonable, and he makes it clear that he does not see any justice in what is happening. And this dialogue goes on for a long time. It's more of the same, but the language is quite. I found it quite impressive. It's very poetic, and very sort of just magnified. Fast forward all the way to chapter 38, because this is not a Bible school, and I don't want to go through all the repetitiveness of everything that is going on here. It's not repetitive with the words, because every chapter is quite creative, but the message and the purpose of each of the chapters is basically the same. We then get to chapter 38, which is when God finally intervenes. And you may think that God will then intervene and show some compassion towards his loyal servant Job, but you would be mistaken. Chapter 18 opens. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkened counsel by words without knowledge? It must be a rhetorical question, because God is all-knowing, almighty, and all-powerful, so he should know perfectly who it is that's lying there on his deathbed, especially because he has orchestrated his downfall himself. Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut up the sea with doors, when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of the womb? When I made the cloud the garment thereof, and thick darkness a swaddling band for it, and brake up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors, and said, Hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed. Hast thou commanded the morning since the days, and caused the dayspring to know his place? That it might take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it. It is turned as clay to the seal, and they stand as a garment. This also goes on for quite a bit, but essentially God says to Job that he has no place to question his methods or question the righteousness and the justice of his decision, because Job is human and Job has no knowledge of um, the divinity of God. Yeah, it continues a bit, chapter 39. Knowest thou the time when the wild goats of the rock bring forth, or canst thou mark when the hens do calve? Canst thou number the months that they fulfill, or knowest thou the time when they bring forth? So it goes on like this. It's basically one long brag by God in terms of how glorious He is and how much He knows, and how much He has created. And it ends with Job sort of seeing the nature of God, understanding that yes, he's right. He doesn't have any clue. He shouldn't he shouldn't feel any um, entitlement or any uh, God does not need to explain himself to him. And so he confesses, that he has been wrong, etc., etc. And then God restores upon him and gives him twice as much as he has had in the past, and all his sons and daughters are alive again, and all his riches is doubled, and he lives happily ever after. And before we get to the Jung part of this analysis, I think, and I could be wrong, but I think the point, theologically speaking, of the book of Job is to prove the point that God works in mysterious ways, and that you should not question him. You should trust in the divine justice, whatever that may be and how ill-defined that might be. But it raises often the questions of why do bad things happen to good people? Because that is what happens in the book of Job. Bad things happen to the best of humans. And the answer, theologically speaking, is you shouldn't question that. And if you maintain your faith in Christ, you will be redeemed. I guess it goes like this. Jung's analysis of the book of Job, this is answer to Job's questions, so it's not just an answer to the book of Job. Jung draws upon book of Genesis and all kinds of all other parts of the Old Testament in particular, but also the New Testament. And he doesn't make it very clear when he's drawing from the different, there's footnotes and stuff like that, but Jung is not easy to read. He is very well read. He is very knowledgeable, but he also doesn't make it very clear between when he is arguing a point based on textual references to the scripture, or when he's making his own conclusions. So it is a bit of a tough read, actually. I found this, but I found it incredibly enlightening and incredibly interesting, because Jung has some very interesting takes on the nature of Yahweh, God in the Old Testament. And you can say he highlights all the paradoxes that is in here, and all the inconsistencies. And one of the things that he points out, that he argues, is that one of the fundamental issues with the book of Job is that it is not properly explained or very logical why God feels he need to enter into this bed with Satan to begin with. What was the point of all of that? Was it to prove to Satan how powerful he was? Because it couldn't really be a test if God is almighty, all knowledgeable, and exists outside of time and space, meaning that everything that ever were and everything that ever will be and everything there is right now is all to him happening at the same time, and he has full visibility. There was never any question about how it will all unfold. He would know by the time he initiates the bed, he would know exactly how it will all play out. So what was the point? And Jung points out a lot of these inconsistencies, that it must be sort of concluded that even though God is all knowledgeable, he either consciously or subconsciously chooses not to draw upon that knowledge quite a lot, because otherwise a lot of it doesn't really make any sense. Then Jung also argues the dilemma of the divine justice, and he analyzes the character of Yahweh. And this might be provocative if you are very religious, but he analyzes the nature of Yahweh from a psychological point of view, which is of course not surprising because this is Carl Jung. And he argues, the contradictions of, again, in the book of Job, God kills off Job's entire family. One of his own commandments is that you should not kill, but that applies to humans and not to Yahweh himself, because he is obviously not a human. He is, I guess, a phenomena. Yeah, there is a lot of interesting sort of points made in this book that will, if you allow it and you immerse yourself in it, will make you ponder and reflect upon a lot of things. And Jung also talks about something which I think is quite interesting here, which is on the nature of God and the nature of divine justice. Well, divine justice is what he speaks about, how it's very inconsistent and not very just, really. But on the nature of God himself, he also speaks about that religion or God must be a psychological phenomenon. It's clearly not a physical phenomenon. It's nothing that can be observed in the real world. It is a psychic phenomenon. But Jung's point is that just because it belongs to the unconscious, that doesn't mean that it isn't real. There are plenty of things that are not physically verifiable that are very real to the human experience and the human condition. That has to do with the unconscious level of the individual person and of the collective unconsciousness of humans. So I thought that was quite interesting. And another thing that made me think about is how difficult it is to convey your thoughts and feelings about a topic like this with words. And that again reminded me of Nietzsche, who said that everything for which we can find words is long dead in our hearts. And that seems true to me, right? That if you try to explain some of the most important things in life, you will often come up short. Try to explain love with words. It's going to sound silly and not very authentic. And again, with Jung, when he points to the unconsciousness, there's an interesting point about language that Cormac McCarthy also made in an interview with Oprah, that the unconscious predates language a lot. Like, language is a modern invention compared to the overall existence of conscious human beings. So it's quite natural that there are a lot of things that are not easily explained through the uses of language. And some of these things are, if you try to use them or describe them with language, you probably use poetry or symbols or allegories and similes and metaphors and stuff like that. And symbols, for instance, draws heavily upon the unconscious and upon monomyths, which are myths that have existed in almost all cultures, even though the cultures are not connected. But that speaks to this collective unconsciousness that Jung talks a lot about in this book and in other books, that sort of unifies us as human beings, that we have a collective sense of unconsciousness, evidenced by the fact that we have created similar mythology across cultures in ancient times. So it is a very intense experience, I feel, reading these things, and it really, you immerse yourself in that, and you at least you get a lot of interesting reflections. And this is relevant for the brothers Karamazov because Yeah, 20 minutes into the video, I'm finally getting to the point about why this is relevant for Karamazov. But Dostoevsky was highly religious, and the nature of religion, the nature of the clergy, or the role of the clergy in society, the nature of religion, the nature of God and divine justice, and whether God was benevolent and so on and so forth, was forever present in Dostoevsky's mind, and it was also an important topic of the time it was written. And it is very important in the Brothers Karamazov, and you see the different arguments, for the existence of God and against the existence of God played out in the main characters of Alyosha and Ivan. And so this whole theodicy question of the benevolence of God, on the nature of good and evil, if God even exists, what is the purpose of it all, and what role should religion play in society, both on a personal and collective level, is just forever very present and lurks sort of in the background of all of Dostoevsky's work. It's an overtone that goes across everything, and when you then immerse yourself in biblical readings or interpretations of biblical studies, I feel like you're really immersing yourself into the world and into the mind of Dostoevsky. And you spend some time there, and then you will pick up Brother Karamazov again and sort of read it with all of that context that you have from having been immersed in that in that experience. So that's how I found it to be relevant, and I'll continue to work my way through more of the King James Bible here. It is almost 2,000 pages, even though it's not that thick, but the pages are very thin. I will read the book of Genesis next, I think, and then probably the Gospel of Matthew, and yeah, from there on, I'm not so sure. We'll see. But yeah, that's it from me. Let me know if this gives you any thoughts, if you have read any of Jung's religious critiques or any of the biblical texts in recent times, or if you're reading Karamazov, um, and tell me what you think about it. Thank you.